I think the impact of AI over us, humans and over the human society is going to be massive, in the trillions. Investors just piling on into the same opportunities. And in a way, this is very much akin to what we saw in the late 1990s. What we're looking for is not just value creation, but value creation that stays and keeps generating that value over tens of years potentially. If you don't know what's going to be successful in the application layer, what you do instead is, focus on investing in all the enablers because it's more like a sure bet, right?
Hi, Itamar. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's great to record a podcast in person here in Singapore.
Raul, I'm so excited to be here with you in person in Singapore. And thank you for having me back on your podcast again.
Yeah. So I was listening to a couple of interviews from the All-In Summit last week with people like Larry Page and Elon Musk. Everyone keeps mentioning that they have not seen anything like AI in terms of the progress it's making in their lifetime. So this is going to be important, but then where is the opportunity in AI?
Yeah, so I have a little bit of a contrarian view myself. I think we've seen a big step function with the introduction of generative AI, and now we've moved from things like classifiers using, more traditional machine learning and computer vision, where we would know how to, for example, differentiate between a cat and a dog, or do all sorts of tasks like that, into the age of generative AI, where computer systems, AI, generative AI is basically producing, right? Generating content, whether it's text, image, or video. And I think we've seen a lot of progress there, but we're actually at a point where I believe we're plateauing a little bit. And even, on that topic, Bill Gates actually more recently said that he doesn't expect GPT-5 to be significantly better than GPT-4. I think we're seeing optimizations, incremental increases, and not necessarily more step functions. So that's just my personal view. But then, more toward what you're talking about, the opportunities, I myself am a firm believer that the majority of value creation is going to happen actually at the application layer. So when you think about sort of the stack of AI, there's obviously semiconductors. A lot of people would throw NVIDIA in there. Then there's a data and machine learning model delivery infrastructure, another value layer. Then obviously there's LLMs.
Yeah.
And then on top of all that stack, we'll have applications built. So I believe the vast majority of opportunities actually at the application layer.
But majority of the investment so far has gone into the LLM models, right? Why is that then?
Oh, I think it's a misallocation. I think it's a mistake. It's actually easier to pour money into NVIDIA and big LLMs.
Yeah.
It's investing in picks and shovels. If you don't know what's going to be successful in the application layer, what you do instead is, focus on investing in all the enablers because it's more like a sure bet, right? You're not taking a lot of risk. So I think it's herd mentality. Investors just piling on into the same opportunities. And in a way, this is very much akin to what we saw in the late 1990s, where, Cisco was valued at trillions of dollars because they were the ones that are going to build the infrastructure for the internet, Cisco and other sort of network providers. But what we ended up seeing then, which I think is very likely similar to what we're going to see in the future, is that the Ciscos of this generation, they're going to rise in value and then, go down in value significantly, like we've seen in 1999, while the applications built on top of, of that infrastructure, applications that in the internet era were things like Google and Facebook. And these guys that are building the applications, they're actually going to be the ones that are going to create long-lasting value. Yeah. So I think we're seeing something very similar with this cycle.
Okay. So application layer is the opportunity. Specifically in which sort of maybe industry or sector?
Yeah.
Or what sort of applications?
This is where I'm in line with a lot of the other great leaders that, were in the All-In Summit, where I think the impact of AI over us humans and over the human society is going to be massive, in the trillions. Okay. So I think it's going to impact everywhere. It's going to impact in consumer services, and it's going to make a significant impact in how businesses operate, enterprises, right? I think in in the enterprise, for example, in each department, whether it's sales or marketing or operations or customer support or finance and so on and so forth, we're going to see significant penetration of AI-based capabilities. In some cases, we're going to see AI significantly enhancing the productivity of humans. In other cases, we're going to see AI potentially replacing humans in some of their activities and maybe even eclipsing humans. So I don't think we have a clear enough answer on how big of an impact we're going to have in each one of these. But some of the early indications we're seeing are pretty impressive. For example, with customer support, we've seen what Klarna has been able to do with the help of OpenAI, basically replacing more than half of their incoming customer support tickets with AI capabilities to the satisfaction of their customers.
Yeah. Other than customer support, what other industries you think are like, going to be replaced, or what sort of jobs are going to be replaced soon?
Yeah. Let's actually also address consumer. I'll give you a few use cases maybe that I think are going to be interesting. So obviously there's a big race now for search.
Yeah.
Search is the best business in the planet, right? Google is basically built this massive empire based on search. And that's why we're seeing companies like Perplexity and even OpenAI chasing down market share in search because that's going to be a huge business, right? Similarly, on the consumer side, we know we're going to have a slew of personal assistants and potentially even robots that are going to do, tasks inside our house and so on and so forth. Those things are going to be enabled by AI, if not today, in the next 10 to 20 years. Yeah. Moving more into sort of enterprise, sort of B2B use cases, which is what we focus on more at Recursive Ventures, the venture firm that I run. We are seeing a lot of opportunities around workflows in the enterprise that are very data rich. Accounting, FP&A is an example, the ability to engage with customers in various ways, whether it's replacing SDRs, sales development representatives in what they do, whether it's automating things like fraud detection and cybersecurity using AI. Yeah. I think those are some of the opportunities that are potentially in hand, while other opportunities where there's less data involved and require more human discretion and potentially even human intuition are going to be harder for AI to replace in the near-term future.
Yeah. Yeah. Consumer use case. I mean, there is not an element of my job that is not done with the help of these tools. Actually, I use Perplexity to prepare for this. You mentioned about most of the value creation is going to be in application, right?
I believe so.
Does that also mean most of the value capture will be there, or it will be separate?
Yeah, I believe most of the value is going to be captured in applications for consumer and enterprise. It's not all, but most. And also, it's a question of what type of value will be captured. Is it going to be a long-lasting value or sort of a shorter-lasting value? And that goes back to my example with the Ciscos of the world, where obviously Cisco is still a very successful and significant company. But what we're looking for is not just value creation, but value creation that stays and keeps generating that value over tens of years potentially.
So value creation not always equals value capture, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That is correct.
Yeah.
Good point, Raul.
Huh?
Good point, Raul.
No, I was thinking about it earlier in preparing for this, because there are industries where, like NVIDIA, like the chip manufacturing captures a very low value in comparison to the design by NVIDIA.
Right, manufacturing versus chip design. Yep, correct.
Right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. One other point that I wanted to really discuss was like, how is the user interface going to change? Because until now we were using a lot of tools, right? And this is more like it's actually doing the job for me. And I think people are going to call it AI agents or something. So how do you think the interface is going to change?
That's a very, very interesting question. And I don't think I don't know what the future holds. So my answer here is not going to be a complete one, but I'll tell you what I do feel. Yeah. I do feel that the existing interfaces that we're seeing that are really chatbot based are really not going to be the end user experience that we're going to see with a lot of applications. I think we're going to see a mix of conversational back and forth chat, but we're also going to see other type of interfaces that we're more familiar with, graphical type of interfaces, toggles of all sorts. And really what I think we're going to be able to do with generative AI, because generative AI can also create user interfaces, is we'll have sort of ad hoc dynamic interfaces that enable humans to control AI, humans in the loop, in the most productive and effective way for the point of control that they need to influence in that point in time. So sometimes the best way to feed tokens into these, LLMs is by inputting a lot of text. Sometimes it's by clicking a button or choosing between a few different options. And I think what the AI is going to be able to do, it's going to be able to create dynamically the right interface to be the most productive with the human that's guiding them toward the right path.
Yeah. The SaaS industry is going to sort of morph into this AI agents industry, right? Otherwise they die.
Yes and no.
Okay.
I think there's a couple of things happening all at the same time. So yes, I think we're going to see significant disruption of SaaS companies with AI first, next generation SaaS companies, essentially. But, I also think that we might be exaggerating, especially in the short and maybe even in the midterm, in terms of the ability of AI to cover all the use cases, all the different workflows that people have in their day lives or their jobs. I think there's still a point for SaaS as it is today to help us as humans do the things that we need to do. And then kind of taking it one more level deeper, I would say that we're going to see a lot of existing SaaS companies, incumbents, if you will, who are going to integrate AI into the existing capabilities of their software in very smart ways and kind of mesh between the two, right? And at the same time, we're going to see potentially startups emerge with a completely different approach to solve the same problem with sort of a AI native approach and interface. We're also going to see that. But I think what's most interesting, especially for venture capitalists, is actually focusing on the use cases that were not really enabled before AI, right? Use cases that you couldn't have imagined before AI. And when you think about the parallels, it's actually pretty similar to what happened in mobile, where like a perfect example is Webvan in the late 90s, right? It's like, oh, you're going to get your grocery delivered to you, right? Obviously, that didn't happen. We were 15 years ahead. But when we combined mobile and payments and very smart networks of delivery, suddenly we can have Webvan, and it's called Instacart. Yeah. But it took 15 years to figure that out.
I think Uber or Grab is a perfect example. Without Google Maps, it's not possible, right? Like,
yeah, Google Maps and people with always on connected smartphones in their hands.
Yeah, good point. And you mentioned some of these capabilities are exaggerated. So the one sort of thing that I keep track of is obviously the Gartner hype cycle. And I have a copy of the AI version of it here. What are the things that are like where we are exaggerating in terms of capabilities? Generative AI is at the peak of the hype cycle at the moment?
I'd say in Silicon Valley, we're past the peak. We're in disillusionment. We're understanding that this thing has many more limitations than what we initially thought it would have.
Yeah. I'm just curious about the few other things here in the hype cycle. What are things like model ops, edge AI?
Yeah, so model ops is really part of the infrastructure that you need to be able to do the sort of technical operations of delivering the outputs of models to all sorts of use cases to consumers and businesses. There's been a heavy investments in that space, similar to the investments that we've seen in semiconductors and in the LLMs themselves. And when you're over-investing in infrastructure before you even have the application, then obviously that's a mislocation, right, of the investment. And probably some of your viewers have noted the Sequoia 600 billion infrastructure investment article that more recently came out. I think it was a couple of months ago. And I think that actually does a good job of describing what we've seen with tools like MLOps. And then what was the second category you wanted to talk about?
The second thing is edge AI. What is that?
Edge AI is really all about the ability to deliver generative AI models in an edge computing situation. So that would be on your phone or on an IoT device that's connected to the cloud, where there's significant limitations on compute, right? And accelerated computing, which is what you need to actually do inferences. So that piece is actually very early. Like, we're not yet at the point where we know how to deliver very good models at the edge in some of those clients. And I think one of the interesting tests that we're going to see, and obviously there's a lot of speculative thoughts about that, is what Apple is going to do with the iPhone
Apple
16.
Intelligence. I was about to ask. Yeah.
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 Yeah, so that's going to be intriguing. I just got the beta, I think, a few days ago with the first version of some of the AI features coming out. And I just can't wait to see if this thing is going to be another version of ChatGPT or maybe something bigger. We'll see.
Yeah. Okay. One last thing. I was surprised to see autonomous vehicle. It's along the slope of enlightenment, but it's still like 5 to 10 years away.
Yeah. I think Gartner might have gotten that wrong, but we're still seeing a lot of limitations. I'm an early investor in a company called May Mobility.
Okay.
Which is, I think they're a unicorn or almost a unicorn. They're pretty far along. They drive minibuses in cities in the US, completely autonomous. There's no driver. There's not even a wheel, and drive people around. And it's actually free. You can hop on one and just drive around town. It's a fixed route. And they also have, along the route, they actually have sensors who communicate with the minibuses and kind of help them figure out what's going on. So it is starting to work in some areas, but it's the last mile problem of all the crazy number of edge cases that we just don't have enough data about that make autonomous driving just not as reliable as it should be. I've been in the Tesla beta forever, and they've done a great transformation with their ability when they introduced what's called imitation learning by actually using generative AI techniques to replicate how humans drive based on a lot of videos of human driving. It's improving.
Okay.
But it's far from perfect. Would I rely on it every day and kind of go to sleep while the thing is driving? Absolutely not. So I think that's the gap that, Gartner is talking about.
But, okay. So the one thing I keep thinking is, okay, human drivers are still worse off than the best version of AI driver. Is that true or not at the moment, you think?
I think we have different expectations from humans than we have from AI.
If you've driven in India, maybe yes, for sure.
I have, and I still miss the beeps everywhere. It's like, I'm here, with the beeps. It's funny. I think we would give humans way more slack, and we're not going to give the AI slack. The AI has to be really so much better, so much trustworthy than what we're expecting with humans. And because it's not there, basically the bar is higher, right? And I think that's part of why this is still a challenge in a couple of years out for sure.
Yeah. But don't you think if you don't allow experiments, or like what San Francisco is doing or many cities in US is doing, if you don't allow it to run in actual sort of scenarios, that's the only way to improve, right?
Very likely.
Yeah.
Like anything in AI, the way to improve is to create a massive amount of data that actually has significant overlap with the type of use cases you're trying to cover. The issue is the number of edge cases, use cases in driving is actually endless. So you would need almost an endless amount of data to be able to cover all the things that could happen while you're driving. While the way the human brain works, it enables us to leapfrog on no or very little amount of data to actually solve problems. And that is actually one thing that very nicely illustrates the gap between how humans perceive AI today and what AI can actually do. Generative AI is not like the human brain. It's a statistical model that knows how to predict a word or an image or whatever based on a lot of data it's seen before. And we think about it, some humans think about it more as like AGI. This thing has context. This thing is smart. It's not. If it doesn't have a lot of data that directly relates to what it's trying to do now, you're going to get a much, much lower quality response because there's no intuition, there is no context. This is not a human. This is a statistical model.
So, like, how is human brains different to how the LLM models are?
So I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. I'm not a researcher. I'm a VC that invests in AI applications.
Yeah.
But I can comment. So I can't comment on the human brain as much, but I can comment on what AI LLMs, specifically generative AI, can do. And I think again, it comes down to a couple of things. Like, and it's about setting expectations, like everything in life, you know. So again, humans expect this thing to be sort of this sentient general intelligence thing, and it's not. And the type of issues that we're seeing are stemming from a few different things. First of all, unlike traditional, like non-AI systems, it's actually not entirely deterministic, right? We're expecting to put input X and get output Y out of computer systems. This thing, if you give it the same input with a very slight tweak, you're suddenly getting a completely different output because it correlates to some other data point that it has. So it makes it a little bit unpredictable for humans on one hand. Then obviously you've got all those issues around hallucination. So hallucination is this, again, you have a statistical model that's just replicating, outputting based on statistics everything that it has seen. It doesn't have the context of whether this thing makes sense or not, whether it's real or not. You can have this discussion with ChatGPT. There's a kind of a known blog post about that, where the thing argues with you for hours that strawberry only has 2 R's, right? And like, why? Not because it has actually spelled strawberry and counted the number of R's, which is what you would expect a human to do, but because it has all this data around all these texts, and there is statistical significance somewhere in there that says that strawberry has 2 R's, and that's what it's going to output. So it's actually not deriving the results that we expect as humans in the same way, and that's why we're not getting the results that we want in a pretty significant number of times. Very disappointing, actually.
Yeah. You mentioned search is going to be a big business, right? Using LLM. But then I also, I was going through your deck, and then I saw that it's not a good business, as in the cost of doing search, especially for just if you're searching for information, the cost of doing it is very high. So Perplexity is not a good business.
Well, thank you for looking at my good, bad, and ugly of AI investing in Silicon Valley. The point I was trying to make there, which is very similar to what you said, is that we've actually been able over the last 2 to 3 years to realize an order of magnitude decrease in cost when it comes to inference, right? Which is great. The issue is we have 1 or 2 more orders of magnitude for us to get to a point where we can enable, from a unit economic standpoint, many of the use cases. And search is a classic example where, with search today, you basically have this very wide, healthy margin from a unit economic standpoint when you're using classic search tools. But if you let LLMs do the search, then you're running into a big problem. And part of it is also tied to the underlying architecture of transformers, where you have 2 sort of cost centers in delivering LLMs. One is the training, accelerated computing. I call it the NVIDIA tax, right? It's like the difference in cost of GPUs in the cloud versus CPUs, specifically GPUs that are used to train, it's just crazy, right? And then the second cost center is the inference, right? And what happens is the more data parameters you put in training and the more data you put with inference in tokens, essentially, the cost does not go up linearly. It goes up exponentially or more. So that architecture is driving an opposite result than what we wanted, right? We want to feed it more tokens. We want to feed it more data, but then it's exponentially taking us longer to get the results that we want, and it's costing us more. And that is a pretty significant gap that we have not yet been able to close.
Yeah. And I also read, again from your deck, that the applications built on top, if it's using open source model plus serverless architecture, they can reduce the cost by 89%.
Yeah, order of magnitude, exactly.
Yeah.
That's what my companies are realizing today.
Yeah.
So the open source models, obviously, it's open source, so you don't have to pay the OpenAI tax, if you will, where API costs as much. Another kind of big trend there, which is related, is that these very large, hundreds of billions of parameters models, the bigger the model gets, the more it costs to use inference with it. So what a lot of companies are doing now in Silicon Valley is they're actually increasingly using smaller open source models and then doing significant fine tuning. We saw post-training and iterative training sessions with data that is either industry specific or use case specific. And the results that they get from doing that work in terms of being able to cover with a high quality of coverage those specific use cases and workflows is actually much better than what we're seeing with a big generic LLM. Yeah. Not only are the results better, it's also significantly cheaper. And that's why we're seeing this rise of open source, smaller models, more advanced infrastructure, driving costs by order of magnitude.
Yeah. Meta is doing open source sort of model, right? Why is that? How does it help them? If you look at, this usually happens when Google was initially competing with Microsoft. They did a lot of gave away a lot of things for free because it helped feed their ad business. Is it something along that lines?
Yes and no. So I have two theories. I'll give them to you really quickly. Okay. Let's start with, it's not exactly my theory, but I think it's the fun one because it's a conspiracy theory. The conspiracy theory is that Meta is trying to eat away all the value generated in AI in the future by open sourcing everything. So there won't be a rise of a significant competitor like an OpenAI, which basically captures significant value from the ecosystem. That's sort of one take on it. The second take on it, which is interesting, is let me actually pose a question to you. Their interviewer, where do you think the vast majority, like 90% of value today, is generated using AI?
NVIDIA.
Mm-mm.
No? I don't know.
Predicting what you want to read next on social media and optimizing which ads you're going to get served.
Yeah.
That is the number one use case and value creation in AI. And it's not even new.
Yeah. That's how they really optimized and improved the business over years, both.
So Meta, by open sourcing AI models and building communities of data scientists to leap forward with those, can actually leverage those same tools to enhance their advertising business and find the best ad for Euro. That is another take on it.
Yeah. I don't know the context of this, but then you also talk about accelerated computing and how that's insanely expensive. What is accelerated computing?
Accelerated computing is GPUs. It's NVIDIA, the NVIDIA tax. It's the cost of training models.
Okay.
Yeah. Just in general, we have CPUs, which are compute, and they typically don't operate in parallel. Yeah. While accelerated computing, the architecture of the chips, the GPUs, is all about computing a lot in parallel. And that's what you need to train models.
Yeah. Okay. You invest in B2B businesses and you make this argument that most of the POCs now, especially with enterprises, fail. Why so?
Well, a recent data point came up, and there's always potentially some contradictory data. And the data point was that CIOs, CTOs in bigger organizations are saying that approximately 90% of POCs with generative AI are failing to reach production. Now, don't freak out, because POCs fail sometimes, and probably 40-50% of POCs would fail anyway. Yeah. But obviously 90% is a big number. And I think there's several reasons why that is happening. One is obviously the limitations of the technology, which we started touching upon. Yeah. And actually, my deck has a list of issues that we know the transformer architecture exhibits, right? So, the technology has limitations. The second thing is, we've started talking about that as well a little bit, is human expectations.
Yeah.
We expect this thing to be an AGI. Well, it is not.
Yeah.
And that makes it hard. And then the other reasons are more classic reasons of tech adoption around change management. Obviously, a lot of people are concerned about, AI is going to take our jobs, right? So
switching cost. Maybe you can define it as switching cost or not.
I think this is more about human nature.
Okay.
If we're going to replace Raul with an AI, which is going to ask Itamar the best questions, Raul might freak out. He might not want to adopt this piece of AI software that's being thrown his way, right? He might resist. And it's just human nature. But I think with this cycle of innovation and technology, it's way more in your face than in previous cycles, because up until now, we've been moving people from doing farm job and automating blue collar jobs. But now we're automating knowledge workers, right? We're automating white collar jobs. And that's scary for many people, right?
Okay. Is it really though? Because, okay, I can't maybe imagine this, but what would have the people who first started using computers felt like maybe 40, 50 years? They would have also felt the same, right? Like suddenly I was doing pen and paper and then you have this tool that can do it much faster.
Well, you realize that when those PCs started coming out, everybody was like, nobody's ever going to have these things in their homes. There's actually a famous interview with Steve Jobs somewhere where he's like, everybody's going to have one of these in their homes and they're going to use it to do shopping, blah, blah. And everybody was laughing at him. It didn't make sense. So I think early on, they didn't really understand the power of computers. And I think AI is actually very similar in how it's going to impact our society to the introduction of personal computing. But now we're much smarter about this, and we understand that this thing can replace a lot of the things that we do. And I think that creates panic, and there's a lot of unknown. So that's a big part of the issue.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about the limitations in LLM is one of the reasons for the failure in adoption. Could we go deep there in the sense?
Double click?
Yeah, double click is the word a lot of people use. Yeah.
That's a Silicon Valley thing, obviously very digital. Yeah, so there are quite a few. Obviously, there's limitations around data, getting data, privacy, using user data, HIPAA compliance in health-related data. That's actually a big barrier because, again, we have already established that these LLMs are just very data heavy. And if we're going to have all those kind of data walled gardens, that's going to be an issue to actually deliver the quality that we want outputted from LLMs. So privacy and privacy concerns is one barrier. Obviously, hallucinations. It's just the way this thing is architected. It just makes up stuff.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really exist. And it doesn't have contextual mechanisms like the human brain to actually say, oh, no, wait, this output doesn't make sense because there are no dragons out there, right? The LLM could be led, depending on what data it's being fed, to believe that dragons are real.
Yeah.
It just depends on what data you feed the thing, right? So hallucination is a big issue, and it leads us to a point of mistrust, right? This thing also doesn't have guardrails. Let's say we take the strawberry example I had before, and you put this thing in front of one of your end customers, right? Of your customers. It's going to argue with your customer that strawberry, no, it's just going to make my brand look really bad, hurt my reputation. I don't know if I can trust it without having a human in the loop. And that's, again, a big problem because we're taking humans out of the loop with this thing, but it's not ready for that. In Silicon Valley, we're all very worried in different ways about the regulators. You have administrations all over the world saying that we need to control AI, that we need to inhibit AI. I think that's scary for innovation. And I think it's also very scary for big companies. So if you're a bank, if you're an insurance carrier, kind of a company operating in a highly regulated environment, then this is a concern that is creating limitations on the capabilities of generative AI. The next one, which I think is really important, is explainability.
Yeah.
This kind of adds up to trust. there's a lot of companies out there that can tell you today that, oh gosh, we can explain. And even like Perplexity, which we threw in as an example, it gives you the source of where it got the answer from. But that's actually not explainability. Nobody really knows how to do explainability well because there's a black box in there in that transformer architecture that even our best scientists do not understand.
Yeah.
So the fact that at the end it has given you a result and now it can attribute where it got that result from does not mean that it can explain how it got there. And actually, we don't know how to explain that yet.
Yeah.
And if we can't, we have a black box. And if we have a black box and we let the black box make a decision for our lives as humans, that's kind of scary.
Yeah.
The last issue that we're seeing, which is big, is overfit. We've talked about this a little bit. Too much data leads to this thing bouncing around, getting out of context. Inputting too much data into tokens, like the example that you described, where we have a very long sentence and it's got stuff in the middle and stuff at the end. And so the LLM picks different parts of this and like doesn't weigh them properly in terms of their impact and what the response should be. Again, sort of generates results that are just lower quality.
Yeah.
And obviously, if it's not high quality enough results, what is this good for? And by the way, it can't even tell us what is the probability that this thing is right versus wrong, which is another big problem.
Yeah. I've listened to a bunch of interviews, even the CTO of OpenAI. Nobody knows how this works. It's a black box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That is insane. Yeah.
But by the way, I don't want to come across as like super negative here. I think AI is absolutely going to change the world. It's going to be the biggest change we've seen with computing since the invention of the personal computer. It's going to take longer and it's going to be more complicated than we think it is today. And that's why we shouldn't get ahead of our skis. We should understand what this technology is capable of delivering now, make the best of it, and then continue to explore and figure out what is the right architecture, the right approach to solving some of the other problems that we might have, and eventually lead the road to AGI, which, is a very high level term. Like nobody even knows how to define AGI, but I think there will be more and more capabilities that will be unraveled using AGI that I don't think that transformer, the LLM technology, can deliver today.
Yeah. Earlier you mentioned the Bill Gates code that the GPT-5 will not be considerably. So that means that maybe the technology progress curve with LLM, the current sort of transformer architecture is slowing down?
Plateauing, potentially.
Plateauing.
Which, by the way, should come as no surprise. You have technology step functions, and then what you get from there is not necessarily a step function. Yeah. It's more of an optimization.
Yeah.
So this is almost
more like
as
our
expected.
phones nowadays.
Yeah, like iPhone 14 versus 15 versus 16. Sure, there's a slightly better camera, and that's as expected. So I think that is what... I open up YouTube. There's so many YouTubers talking about AI, saying, oh, this thing is moving so fast. It's like they are assuming that we're going to continue to see a series of step functions. Well, I would assert that we've seen a very significant step function. Yeah, this is massive, right? But the assumption that those step functions are going to keep coming in spades at that pace is unlikely. And those YouTubers need to get views. So they're trying to convince us that this thing with another 50 billion parameters is going to solve all these problems. Well, likely that's actually not the right path forward.
Yeah. So to summarize, it's like that saying, right? We underestimate what is going to happen in long term and overestimate things in short term. That's it.
100%. Like any technology cycle, I don't think this is different. Yeah. And I think that a lot of people out there who think that this is going to happen so much faster, I think they might be wrong. I'm not saying this is going to take 15 years, but it's definitely not there today, and it's going to take us a while to figure out.
Yeah. If it takes us a while to figure out, then as a VC, where is the opportunity? You invest in specifically B2B companies operating in AI sort of data space, right? So where are you seeing the opportunities?
Yeah, I think, again, we're going through a significant misallocation phase. Yeah. Investors are. We're misallocating on timing. We're jumping ahead of ourselves. the Gartner hype cycle, right? We're in a bubble, and we're also misallocating wrongly in the stack. We're putting on this money in NVIDIA, semiconductors, infrastructure, LLMs. The money again is going to be in applications. So that really is at the core of our thesis at Recursive Ventures, and how we invest is because we're very early investors, pre-seed and seed. We invest in companies today that are going to change the world 5-10 years from now. So that's a significant amount of time in the technology world. And we do that in the application layer. And I think that's where at least private capital, venture capital should flow into. Well, the numbers speak very differently. Actually, an interesting stat for you, Raul, is that in 2023 and early data about the entire 2024 is indicating that there's actually a decrease in VC investments in vertical applications. That is, negative correlation to what I believe we should be investing in.
Yeah. Okay, just to clarify, you mentioned stack that we should be allocating more resources to the application layer, right? So timing wise, how are we misallocating?
The Gartner hype cycle.
Yeah.
We think that AI is coming tomorrow, and it's actually going to be another 5 to 10 years. Yeah. So we're investing hundreds of billions of dollars in semiconductors and tools to deliver trillions of value in AI applications, and those applications are not there yet.
Yeah. But this usually happens, right? Going back to the .com thing, I think a lot of companies invested billions of dollars in internet infrastructure, laying down all the cables and stuff. A lot of it went bankrupt. One final thing.
Just one? This is easy.
How do you think this is going to change the VC industry?
Oh, that's a massive question. I have so many different interesting answers for you. First of all, there's a couple of things happening at the same time. Productivity lift, especially for cutting edge knowledge workers, is on the rise. I have companies in my portfolio where the CTOs are telling me that they're doing, 2, 3, 5x more productivity with a single engineer than they could have done before. Are we going to need hundreds of engineers to build software in a world where, AI is able to build a lot and test a lot of this software for us? Debatable. Same goes with go-to-market functions, marketing, sales development. Like, we're increasingly seeing AI agents and agentic workflows that are delivering massive productivity or potentially replacing humans there. So are you going to need that $500 million check from Andreessen Horowitz to take it to the next level, right, for your company? I am not entirely convinced that's what we're going to see. So I believe we're going to see the VC industry potentially shrinking, where we're going to see smaller funds because of that increased productivity. And I think we're going to be able to build software, AI software, much faster, much cheaper. And the result would be a narrowing down of the sizes of venture funds. And to be completely honest and blunt about this, I don't think that's what VCs want to see, because they want to grow their AUM and get more fees, but they will have to adopt. And that's also part of why for us at Recursive Ventures, we're very focused on staying small, staying scrappy, and focused on the inception stages of companies versus trying to find ways to inject hundreds of millions of dollars into companies at a later stage when they don't necessarily need that.
So what you're saying is we can build, future startups would be a lot more capital efficient, right? Will it also be high margin similar to software?
That's an interesting question. I believe that eventually, yes, but it's going to be a little bit of a journey until we get there. Obviously, with what we've talked about, the cost of training, the cost of fine-tuning, the cost of inference, we're not seeing the type of unit economics that we want to see. We're not seeing the potentially 80+% terminal margin profile for companies today. But I think we're very likely to see them in the future, because at the end of the day, AI models exhibit the same type of behavior that software exhibits, where you kind of theoretically, you build it once, but the cost of servicing the N+1 user trends to zero. So I think we will get there, but we're not there today.
Yeah. And if it's capital efficient, high margin, then VC should do really well.
Yeah, but what if it doesn't need as much capital? It will do well,
Yeah.
but not with a $5 billion fund.
Yeah, that has to change probably.
Maybe. That's my bet.
Cool. Thank you so much. This is great. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is always fun. And I hope we can do this again in person in Singapore.
Yeah, probably next year, same time.
Yeah, for sure.